All right, now it should be live. Let's see here. All right, what's going on with this? Yeah, okay, so it's streaming. Um, let's see here. Try it on your end. Can you hear it?
Oh, I closed the tab before I could hear myself in the stream.
Gotcha. You heard me though, but not yourself.
I heard you before.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you in there.
All right, cool. So it's just gonna be you and me until Rob can join us.
Yeah.
But
If
yeah.
nothing else, you can join in part 2 because I'm sure there will be one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, what was your initial thoughts on the book?
I mean, I have been a long-term critic of the way that the school system works, so it was more affirming things that I already thought.
Yeah, it was a lot of confirmation bias there, like going in.
Um, yeah, so one of the podcasts I listened to prior, which is done now, called School Sucks, is also run by a former teacher, and a lot of the material that they pull from is either John Taylor Gatto or the people that he cites in Dumbing Us Down.
Gotcha. So basically, the reason you picked the book to discuss is because of your, would you say, unabiding hatred of schooling, or?
I actually picked it because I think education's a cornerstone, and
Mhm.
if it's completely fucked, then there's really nowhere to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think education is a cornerstone of like any society, but I also agree with his assessment that schooling is not a good place for education. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, so my favorite part of the book, honestly, was the Green Minnetonkan section. Uh,
Which bit again? Sorry.
so it's about this the river that he grew up on.
Oh yeah.
And the idea of like more than just schooling, the idea of the fact that communities rely for children's education, not schooling. And I thought that was a very cool expression like it doesn't really matter about the weaponry because there was very little
Yeah.
death, but like totally independent of that, the systemization of schooling, and I am gonna just as he says in that book, I'm gonna call it schooling now, not education,
Yeah.
because it is not educating the youth of our nation, but it is systematizing it and making them essentially drones. This is basically what
Yeah.
people become.
It is training them rather than educating them.
Yes, yes. But yeah, no, I liked that one a lot because he talked about the way he got an education in basically the small town that he grew up in, right? And
Yeah.
that the things that he derived from that education was much more like important to him than the things in schooling that is taught.
Well, and I mean, there's always the low hanging fruit of, you know, Mark Twain dropped out of school,
Mm-hmm.
not even once he had entered into high school,
Mm-hmm.
right? He,
Yeah.
he dropped out in what would be considered like elementary school in the modern era,
Mm-hmm.
and he worked on a riverboat. And it's not like he didn't learn how to read or write. It's not
Or
like
possibly
he,
become one of the greatest
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right?
intellectuals of
It's not like he
America.
was a dumb guy. It's not like he was uneducated. He ended up
Yeah.
working as a clerk for a while, and I think that's how he got a more solid handle on writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but yeah, basically because his father died, someone had to to be the bread maker
Mm-hmm.
or the breadwinner. Sorry.
No,
Uh,
I'm the bread maker, not the winner.
I mean, you're just following in my footsteps.
Oh, okay, that's true. But no, the as an aside, for that comment, I made another batch of bread, which turned out to be crackers because I left it in there for way too long.
Well, they're
Uh,
biscuits, there, yeah.
but yeah, no, the things that he talks about in that book, specifically about being educated through the efforts of like good people in the community, is like extremely important.
Oh yeah.
And it is something that is missing not just in like the like okay, let's assume for a moment that the idea of um, modern education, in that the state provides education to students, right?
Yeah.
Is good. If we just assume that for a second, right?
Sure.
The fact that it is being done by a group of what are essentially bureaucrats for their own benefit, like, and focus on their own benefit rather than the benefit of like the thing that they are supposed to do, is an extremely dangerous precedent that we have set.
Yeah.
And it does not provide education to the student, because it is not for the student's benefit. The teachers are not for the student's benefit, which is not to say that they're evil people, right? But they don't have your child's best interest, like, and it's because they are self-interested.
Well, the other thing too, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted this topic, because I will say, so the one thing that we did kind of outline when we started this, or at least I strongly pushed for, was to not follow anything topical,
Mm-hmm.
and to some extent, technically, education is topical, particularly now, but the discussion is entirely around the curriculum and the teachers,
Yeah,
which is
I
not
don't really.
actually.
Yeah,
The
I don't really
concern.
care about the curriculum or teachers. Like
Yeah.
the fact that these systems exist is bad.
Well, so I mean, even just the thing, the portion about grading, and it's like, okay, well, obviously you would want somebody else to go and check in and make sure that you're not, say, delusional about your ability to do a particular thing. But that's also like, if you test somebody through the execution of the actual thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I have to, if I have to converse in another language to show that I can speak that language, it's going to become pretty apparent to me that I can't actually speak in that language,
Mm-hmm.
unless I've gone really off the deep end. But
Do you know Bert Kreischer? Do you know who Bert Kreischer is?
yeah,
So you've heard the machine joke?
oh yeah,
Yeah, so you got this miner in Russian, spoken none of the language, for his trip to Russia, right? And it was because they needed the job, like the associate professor needed that job, and
yeah,
because they needed that, and because they just basically, like in colleges, just pawn off undergraduate stuff to grad students, right? Um, that he was able to get that, but he had no real demonstrable like ability to speak Russian.
Well, I'm not even going that far. What I'm sort of getting at is like, people cheat themselves out of improvement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get people who go to the gym and they just kind of sit on their phone the whole time, and they
Yeah,
maybe do like a set, and then they're like, oh yeah, I exercise, I go to the gym, I got a gym membership, right? What you
yeah.
don't want is that.
I go for an hour every day.
Yeah, what you don't want is that, but for education, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want kids going, yeah, I studied, and they like read half a page, right? Or they or they went, yeah, I'll do like 3 equations, and it's like they kind of got it, but not really, and then they leave and they come back like 3 days later and they've forgotten it all.
Well,
Right? So this,
it's not only that, but it's the ability for you to. I think that like the main thing that I got from it, and I really agreed with the thing that really resonated with me in his description of schooling is that kids are smart enough to study what they want. Like they
yeah,
know what they're interested in after a certain point, and to continually force them into this rigid goal of standardized testing and all this shit is basically just ruining the ability for those kids to do what is going to be of greater
yeah.
benefit for them.
Well, so my point is that the goal of the standardized test is to provide some kind of empirical metric by which to show the students how much they actually know. But what it ultimately ends up doing with all of these grading systems, and this is the thing that shows up in the book that I think kind of pushes more towards the idea of like a fraction test, a written test, standardized, so that you can deliver it to as many students as possible, is just like the reward system causes people to then externalize the value of their work. Right, so it's not that I did a good thing and it's a good thing because I did it and I appreciate it. It's I gotta see if someone else appreciates it as well. And I do think that feeds into the current sort of culture of oversharing and clout chasing.
Mm-hmm.
Is like anything that you do, it can't just be done. Like nobody's building some crazy model now for their own benefit, or at least nobody on social media seems to be doing that. They all seem to be building it so that they can take a picture of it later and show it to people, and then receive.
No one's out there cooking food for the sake of their own nourishment and their own enjoyment. They're doing it so they can post on an Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. Then there's the what he talks about, like the sort of establishment of classes within the school system, social classes.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know that that's quite played out the way that he talks about, because the way that he stratifies it is based on like people who aren't part of the or the schooling system, right? Like so people who are getting A's and doing really well, and people who are not. And that's not quite how I saw it playing out. That would be a minor point of disagreement. I think there's a different social class that definitely is not alleviated in any way by the way that school already works. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that has made a significant change in it, but I don't think it's the primary driving force.
Maybe. Like the stratification that I saw when he talked about that is in literal classes.
No, I get that.
Yeah, and like, but like to your point, I agree. Like most of the stratification of like how well you do and all that is socio and economic, right? But the main thing that he pointed out in that section that really resonated with me for that point was the stratification of age, right? So like,
yeah,
you cannot do or cannot talk to or cannot socialize with people that are a year older than you. Like that is completely absurd. And then on the other side, like going much further, right, outside of schooling, adults are not allowed to like interact with with children, right? They're not allowed to actually have actual interactions with actual adults, right? Like that is verboten by schooling, and it is completely preposterous, because the people that they are going to have to eventually work with are those people. They are those adults, and they are like the society as a whole.
Well, so the thing I was referring to is at one point he sort of alludes to the idea that like your ability to survive within the school system denotes some kind of like social class hierarchy within the like student structure, which I've never seen to be the case. Like there are people who were popular who got, you know, good grades for sure, but there are also plenty of people who got mediocre to poor grades who were similarly popular.
Oh,
And it didn't seem to really...
I think what he was talking. So you didn't have like IB and like advanced coursework
Oh, I see.
things.
So
I'm pretty sure.
you're thinking he's talking about within the...
Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about.
Hmm.
Like honors classes, and IB classes, and I can't remember what the other one
So
was.
I know he does talk about that in the context of like the parents who are part of the... Or maybe I'm now mixing up Vision of the Anointed with this. But I remember reading a bit about the parents who are sort of part of the larger social structure anyway, just kind of paying their way around the system and putting their kids through a private school regardless.
Yeah, no, he was specifically talking about the public schooling system, and that within the public schooling system, and I don't remember anything about private schooling, so I think you are mixing these up. But in the public schooling system, you have the people that are better or worse or whatever, that are shown as better or worse by the school themselves. The thing he was talking about when he did that, or the thing that leads into is his talk about that little girl that could read like 2 grades ahead of where she was, and him basically like demanding that the principal, I think it was, test that person to get that to get her out of the schooling classes that she was in, because she was in like I don't know, some like remedial reading classes and stuff, and English classes, and she clearly did not need to be.
Well, she should have been above her grade level in terms of any kind of English classes. And that speaks to a different portion of it, which is that like it really is about control, like that kind of those kinds of events, and that's not the first time I've heard of an event like that, right? Or the opposite, which is like I think I've told you this anecdote before, but I'd heard similar ones from other people where like not quite this bad, but when I was in high school, when I was in grade 10, we were reading To Kill a Mockingbird, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a terribly long book, not a terribly difficult book.
Right.
But there were multiple people in the class who could not read it at a sufficient pace to keep up with the rest of the class, and so they were given like a tape recording of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they listened to an audiobook instead of reading. And to me, like if the goal is to push people through these courses based on their capability to read, like they shouldn't be in the higher classes. And if that's a problem, like if we're like, okay, well, obviously there's people who are dyslexic and stuff like that, right? And obviously there are people who have other circumstances that will hold them back. And if we don't think that that's sufficient to deem someone like unready for the rest of society, then I guess we've got to change what our expectations are, right? Like if it really is so trivial to push someone through English all the way up to grade 12, even though they can't read at the level that you consider to be the bare minimum, then obviously it's not really necessary for somebody to complete English 12, is it?
we can't have their parents have to deal with them for 18 hours a day. That would be disastrous for the population. Is basically what it is. And if you judge someone correctly on their ability, that would be harmful to them. Is the only thing I can think of as the mentality. It's a very strange world that we live in which everyone is allowed to just basically fail upwards.
Well, and it makes way more sense when you think of the system as something that is more about the behavior that you're drilling in than it is about the subject matter that you're trying to supposedly educate people on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if the goal was to get people to learn how to read, then you would probably do something like let students pick books that
Mm-hmm.
were, agreed upon to be sufficiently challenging, that they were interested in,
Right.
and then maybe write a report that shows that they've read the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and or even just choose from a selection of books, right?
Right.
And then have some, teachers can't necessarily read every book that a student might pick up, but they've probably read, say, a collection of, say, 5 books or 15 short stories or something like that. And it's not hard to do like a little skim read refresher on it, or pick up one or two things that like only people who had actually read it would know about.
Mm-hmm.
And so something like that would be more convincingly in favor of encouraging people to read than we're going to have you read a new book every like 6 months or so that we pick, and we're going to go through the same subject matter we did on the last few books because we've themed these all. We've got a theme for the year basically, and we've got a theme for the next 5 years, and those two themes are going to be continuously drilled into you, even though you probably learned them pretty early on. And if there's a point where you don't think that this is on the same pattern, it's probably because you expected more from us. Um, it's I don't know. It becomes so much more obviously about the idea of enforcing behavior and drilling that into students than it is about.
Well, it's making them, uh, it it's making them accept basically that the things that are told to them must be accepted as true at face value, no matter what. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, like you have to accept authority's opinion as the correct opinion on all things, no matter what.
Well, and it's one of those things where I think, while there's definitely teachers that aren't like that, that want you to ask questions and want you to question, push back on things.
Mm-hmm.
There's the system itself is not conducive to that. Right? They're fighting a losing battle, and
Mm-hmm.
so, um, I mean, even stuff like, I remember in grade 4. I had to like I wasn't a terribly confrontational person. I'm still not terribly confrontational for the most part. Um, and my teacher was talking about uh, how it was I was talking about an article that I had read in I can't remember what magazine it was, that was talking about genetically modified food, and how crops were being modified in this way and that way, and so I mentioned this, and my teacher was convinced that that couldn't be true, because basically she hadn't heard of it. Like her exact words were something along the line of like, if they did something like that, they would have to tell us. And I had to bring in the magazine and go, here, this is the thing. Like, I'm telling the truth here. I'm in the right. That same teacher, by the way, we sat through an earthquake, and she was convinced it was just construction, so she told us not to get under our desks.
Oh my
So,
god.
Yeah. And I've run into other people like that, like people who were convinced the sky was blue for the wrong reason, or who like, oh, I remember I was told like at one point that daylight savings time was not for workers but for farms, which like doesn't make sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah. Well, no, it was clearly for office workers because they were trying to burn less oil. That was the that was
yeah.
the point.
Well, and it's one of those things too where when you look at Saskatchewan, which is the farming province
Mm-hmm.
in Canada, right?
Yeah.
There are farms elsewhere, but Saskatchewan is mostly farms
Yeah.
and
It's
oil
like
at this point.
it's like Iowa or Nebraska and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
they don't do daylight savings at all.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it like
Um.
the farmer gets up and goes to bed with the sun. Like they
Yeah.
don't like what
Well, at a certain point, they got to get up before the sun because,
you know
during the winter
what
we get like
right,
6 hours of
what
daylight.
I'm
But
saying is that
sure,
the sun dictates more of their work habits
absolutely.
than the fucking time does. And yeah, like yeah, I did work on a farm, and like most days, I woke up before the sun.
Yep.
Like it's just like that's what you did because you have to eat and you have to do all of this stuff and you have to get ready, you have to get dressed, you have to do all that stuff, and you have to do all the cooking and you have to clean stuff, and then you leave and then you have to do all of that stuff again for all the animals and
Yeah.
all of the crops and stuff that you're dealing with. Like there's no this idea that any farmer needs daylight savings time, even though it was invented in I think it was the 20th century, right? Or 19th century. Can't remember when. It was right around. It was beginning of the 20th into the
It's
19th.
fairly recent in either case.
Yeah, and like farmers are like one of the oldest professions like known to man,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they've just been plugging away since prehistory without daylight savings time, but all of a sudden they need it.
Well, to be
Like,
fair, that's not really a counter argument against it because like farmers for most of history also didn't use heavy machinery or anything like that, right?
well, they
There
weren't
weren't.
even really using heavy machinery when daylight savings time was still in.
Sure, but they're using it now, right?
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
that wouldn't be necessarily like processes change over time. But the basic argument that like it obviously doesn't really benefit farmers that much, and it really only would be for like office workers. That really is the main thing. And actually, speaking of the recency of this process, we probably should talk about just how new our conception of like a traditional schooling system.
yeah, for sure. I mean, he brings it up in the book too. Is like it was basically since the Civil War that the idea of having a public school existed in the United States.
Yeah, well, it was the 1880s when they had finally forced enough students in in Massachusetts
Hmm.
to some some stock footage has audio in it. Bat saying.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Okay, let me mute that then really quickly. I didn't know that. Let's see here. So, mute source. All right, there. It should be muted now. Thank you for letting me know that, Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Bat. What was I gonna say now? Yeah, so
1880s.
1880 is when they finally had forced enough children in at gunpoint
Mhm,
to the school system, and that's for one state,
mhm.
right? So the idea of like a national schooling system is very very recent.
Yeah.
And this idea of like standardizing school across all states is very recent, and we're now dealing with a system that people are convinced like has only recently turned bad. They're I've had multiple conversations now with people where they're like, no, the problem with the school system is like the past like 30 years of slow progressive encroachment. It's like no, the slow progressive encroachment starts with the initiation of public schools.
Yeah.
The education systems that people had prior, those were the traditional education system, and they
Right.
worked better.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. The only real option, as far as I can tell, um, is like as and that was the other thing it says like any proposal for more money for schools is completely useless. Like the
Yeah.
the amount of money that we spend per student on schooling is insane. Even in comparison to other countries, like we spend far more than like countries in Europe do, and
Oh yeah.
we get worse results like every time. It is totally preposterous to think that if we just expand the system that has repeatedly failed, that at some point it'll get better.
Well, and conversely, it's also foolish to believe that if we simply revolutionize the system and replace their people with our people, that the system becomes um, workable.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say it won't become better, because at least you won't have to worry about your children becoming little communists or something, right?
Yeah.
But you're not really solving the overall situation. You're not solving the overall problem, which is that the system itself is geared towards an incorrect incentive structure for both instructors and for students.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't teach them much of what they'll need in the world overall, and it teaches them in a way that does not prepare them appropriately.
Well, the other thing too is like having that information available is good, but the so like the other thing he talks about like in the book is that you can't really have an incentive to teach a student other than the fact that you want to teach them something. Like
Yeah.
that should be the incentive is that you want people to learn the things that you have to teach. Like I have a lot of information on computers and cybersecurity and all that stuff, and I have never even considered the idea of charging someone for an exchange of baseline information. Like
Yeah.
it is completely it's completely wrong, really, to have that happen. Like a monetary exchange between me and another person because I tell them like this is what a secure password is completely preposterous to me.
Well, and if you were to teach them something like that, what you wouldn't do is break it down into tiny pieces where you have to jump between subjects. I'll take way too much time going over all the subject matter and going into minutia that they don't need to know. Refuse to connect anything in a logical pattern, and then grade them on it.
Yeah. Like it's totally erroneous to tell a child that you'll use it someday, right? Like I like science, and it was like a fun topic in school for me to go to, like physics and stuff. It was neat.
Yeah.
Um, but like I don't use it anytime. Like I don't use physics. I don't like do
Yeah.
physics equations.
Well, even let's even go for the rudimentary stuff, right?
Yeah.
When is the last time that you? I mean, first of all, without school, you would still be able to figure out what the planets were called. But when's the last time you actually had to know the order of the planets in the solar system, and what all their names were? Like
I don't know, but
occasionally
I
you'll
just
see.
I still don't like have that memorized. I just know that Pluto is one of them. That's all I know
Well, no,
for sure.
it's arguably not a planet anymore. So you only got a half point there on this solar system test, and you forgot Earth. So that's like -1. Um, you should at least remember the Earth because you live here.
Oh yeah, we're
Um,
part of the solar system. I always forget that.
but yeah, every so often you might see an article that mentions Saturn or Neptune or something like that, or a mission to Mars, right?
But no one
And
talks about Uranus because it's too funny. Like you
yeah,
can't.
well, they tried Uranus, and that really didn't help either.
No.
So there's no getting around it. But
Um,
but that's the thing is you know that is sort of the baseline, like one of the baseline science things to know, and most people will never use it. Even the stuff that is useful, right? Like remembering how the rain cycle works, right? Or knowing how the geography of an area affects the weather, right? Those are things that people ought to know and often don't think about, and don't think about
I
enough.
wasn't even that wasn't even addressed in public schooling for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do know about those things, but I know about those things because I worked on a farm,
Hmm.
and part of like working on said farm was knowing those things.
Yeah.
Like that, you just had to know those. And if you didn't know those things, then you just had a bad time. And I just asked questions, and they're like, "Yeah, it's like this is the way it works." My uncle had the farm that I worked on, and he
Yeah.
just opened up a farmer's almanac and was like, "Yeah, this is how it works, and this is why it works, and this
Huh.
is."
Yeah, no, we learned about like different states and then how that feeds into the rain cycle and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah, no,
Um,
none of that was taught in school.
huh.
Yeah, A- and it is useful information, but I really needed to learn um, that in 1066, this guy named William went across like some channel or he changed the channel or something on a TV, and then he made English.
um, the one that is interesting to me is the stuff that I had to learn in like self-taught stuff, reports and all that.
Uh-huh.
That I remember far better.
Oh yeah.
And that again feeds back into this idea that like the curriculum isn't really the thing that's helping you out.
No,
Because
not at all.
I there's a park, not like a pruned domesticated, mown lawn park,
Hmm.
but like a small forest essentially,
Hmm.
near where I grew up. And there's some wildlife in there. I think there's been a bear in there once or twice, but it's very rare
Hmm.
because it's kind of still in the middle of civilization.
Right.
And but like, every once in a while, there's been like a deer spotted in there, but it's mostly the coyotes and birds and squirrels.
Right.
And I was walking through there one day, and I saw an owl. And
Nice.
without considering what that owl could be, my brain went, "That's a barred owl."
Hmm.
And I knew that because I had done a report in grade 3 about owls.
Nice.
And after that, I was because I had done this research on them, and because birds of prey in general are just pretty cool.
Right.
I continued to read more about them, and so this studying that I had done, just out of pure curiosity, some 15 years prior,
Right.
was still not even like, oh, I might be able to scrounge that up knowledge, but like just ready to go.
Yeah. And yeah, it those types of things. Like my career is basically based off computers, and there wasn't a goddamn single computer class all throughout my schooling.
Yeah.
Not a single fucking one. And the the thing that got me into computers was video games because I liked video games. So
Yeah.
I wanted to play on video games on my computer, and then I needed the video game. I wanted the video games to be better to play, so I learned about computers so I could make the computer better to play the video game. Like that was the impetus for my learning about computers.
Oh,
Right.
and let's confess a little bit here.
Mhm.
How many World War II firearms do you know the stats of? Like the magazine capacity, the round that it fires, right?
So there's the 6.5 Carcano. There's the 8 millimeter Mauser, 303 British, 7.62 54R because it's rimmed.
Yeah.
Mauser or Mosin Nagant. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like for a very long time, all of my World War II shooter, well, my World War II knowledge came from World War II shooters.
Yeah.
because it's like, well, oh, which gun do I want to use? Well, this one has, exactly this magazine capacity, and this one over here has this, and but this one's slightly more accurate, and
Yeah. But so honestly, um uh the World War II shooter thing happened after, it was like during high school at some point, I think.
mm.
Um and I was already balls deep into guns and weapons.
Oh,
Like
there you go.
so there was like four books in the library that we had. They were all about weaponry. They had like a firearms book, and they had like a blades book. So it was like
Mm.
all in, like looking at like different like swords and knives and stuff, and guns, and like how the guns worked, and like what open on, or cock on open versus cock on close and all that stuff. And I didn't fire, like, I fired a gun like once at this point, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a gun nut or anything, but I just loved like the mechanics of like all of this weaponry, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I know a bunch of like just useless stuff about guns that, like, what's a good example? Do you know what a Manet ball is?
No.
So a Manet ball, it was primarily used in the U.S. during the Civil War,
Mm.
and it was used for the first like rifles that we had, right?
Yeah.
So rifling needs the projectile to engage the grooves in the barrel, right?
Mm.
So the way they did it is they had like a really tight fit, like a very tight fit to the bore of the balls that they were shooting through the rifles,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And then the compression of the explosive would cause the little ball to like deform a little bit and engage the
Yeah.
rifling. But the Manet balls would just like drop in there, basically.
Mm.
So you needed some wadding to like keep them there, like a
Yeah.
little bit of snug fit. But they would just like drop in, so they're like super fast to load in, and then they were looked like a pellet, and the black powder charge would ignite, and it would expand the pellet, and that would engage the rifling. And
Okay.
and it was, and like that sort of information is totally never useless. Like, I'm never gonna own a Manet ball, like a Union rifle from the Civil War that shoots Manet balls, but uh it's cool. It's like, it was fun to learn, and me learning it was interesting, and it was far more interesting than the order of the fucking planets, and equally useful.
It also led to certain situations where, like, because I knew more than a teacher about a particular thing, or
Uh-huh.
because I knew about a particular thing that the teacher didn't, they would think that I was mistaken.
Yeah.
So like my history teacher, who I did actually quite respect. She was one of the few teachers that I actually liked.
Hmm.
She also taught psychology, and I think she probably was a little too homework focused.
Yeah.
But overall, I thought her lectures were quite good, as far as lectures go.
Hmm.
And part of that would have been because I was actually interested in the subject matter, though. So I can't. There's definitely a lot of bias there.
Right.
But she was convinced that I was mistaken in mentioning the introduction of the Panther tank, because she's like, no, it's a Panzer, and it's like, well, they're all Panzers, but
The Panther tank, the
the
medium
Panther,
tank,
the
right?
the Mark V,
Hmm.
and and it's like late war, so it's not. I can't remember what the context was. It was something like talking about the German tank production, maybe towards like the mid or end of, and I vaguely remember that that's like when the Panther rollout was, and so I asked about it. She's like, no. I'm like, no, but I did say it at the time, because I'm like, did I remember incorrectly?
Hmm.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the other one, I remember this person was very indignant with me. Um, so she was saying, um, she had okay. So there's this article, and it's about this woman, and there's this her child was trapped under a car, and it was a VW bug, and she lifted up, she lifted the car off of the kid, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, "Isn't that amazing?" I'm like, well, like, and all this stuff, and then it's like that a woman can lift an entire ton off of a child to save
Oh,
them.
yeah. I remember this story.
Yeah, and I was just like, well, yeah, but it's not a ton. The car doesn't even weigh a ton. And she's like,
Yeah.
yes, it's basically a ton and all this stuff. And I was like, no, it's not. And then she confronted me in the hallway between classes because I dared to question her. And she was like, look, that's how much it weighs. It's nearly 2,000 pounds. It's basically a ton. This is like, yeah, but it's not a ton. And it's a lever, so it's not
Yeah.
even
Not listening to the whole
like that
thing.
much.
Um, yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for you don't need to exaggerate something impressive already.
Yeah.
Um, but to the point that we're sort of making here, like that, you got in trouble basically because you weren't learning correctly, and by learning correctly, I mean learning the things that they're actually trying to teach you.
Mm.
Is that you're supposed to sit and take in the information and listen to the experts. And if we look at the society we've produced today, they've been quite successful,
Yeah.
right? Like everybody is. Well, what does the experts say?
So vague info in chat here says, I think that the point of school is to teach people how to study to prep for higher education rather than the content. High school, our courses related this at the start. Yeah. So, but the thing is that all college is a continuation of the same embedded systems that are still there. Like when you go to college, it's just more repeated, uh, like nonsense, basically. Like you like for a computer degree, you have to take a humanities class. You have to take this and you have to take that. And that's fine. And if you want to expose yourself to that, that's fine too. But to like get people to go through schooling to then prepare for college life is preposterous. Like, you don't need elementary education. You do not really need secondary education in order to function in, or secondary schooling, I should say, to function in society. Like, you and those around you can teach yourselves or be taught by others to learn how to read, learn how to write, and learn the basics of how society works. And you'll get a much better information of that.
Well, and as Gatto points out, your reading, writing, arithmetic uh, portion of schooling only takes about 100 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, on the subject of preparing students for college, homeschooled kids go to college fairly often. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
at a higher rate even
Mm-hmm.
than ones who
Per
aren't
higher
homeschooled.
per capita rate by far.
Yeah, yeah. And there's definitely an adjustment period as they get used to a normalized schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But they adjust and they have higher outcomes.
Well,
So I'm
yeah,
not
like
not
I
convinced
think
that.
I totally think that if I when I have kids and I homeschool them, because I'm definitely gonna homeschool them,
Yeah,
I think sending them to a preparatory school, to a prep school, to like a high school, that sort of thing, to prep for college if they want to go to college, is a good idea, and learning what those structures are and how they work. But the idea that I need to take social studies, which is such a useless fucking class, in order to be a functioning member in society is completely absurd.
well, even for the coursework that you're supposed to do as part of your subject matter, right? Like if you're like, I want to become a programmer, most places are telling you, oh, we want you to have a computer science degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of those places are going to turn around and ask you to program a driver?
None of them. None of them are gonna ask you
Right?
to do that.
But that's like everyone that I know. Like there's a guy right now who I know who's going through university who has to make his own compiler. And it's like, okay, when is he ever going to have like? And if he did run into a situation where he'd have to do that, I'm sure he could learn how to and do it, right? But this is a task that he will never, in any reasonable situation, need to do as part of a job, because they will either have some industry veteran who can teach someone else how to do it, who will be making it the first time around, or he won't have to do it because they'll get some third party company to provide them with a compiler, which is what basically everybody does.
Yeah.
And same thing for drivers. Like who is sitting around making drivers in assembly? Well, students. That's who.
Well, I mean, there are programs that do that.
There are.
To be fair to them, if you want to go into automotive stuff, you're gonna make drivers for in assembly, because most of the stuff is in assembly. Anyways,
Sure.
but I have to go. It's been a great conversation as always, and we'll continue this conversation because there's a lot more stuff to go over. So, and hopefully we'll
Yeah,
get.
honestly, with how little we got through, it might even be 3.
It's very possible. It's very possible. Anyway, Vague Info, thank you very much for being the only viewer that was talking. I really appreciate it, and you have a great night, Beeman, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right.